Here's a video of many prophets one message claiming that the Qur'an refutes atheism in less than 10 words.
The argument from dependency can be used to make an irrefutable case for God's existence. It goes like this. Everything we observe in the known universe is dependent. When we say that something is dependent, we mean that its existence and the properties it has requires an explanation outside of itself.
In those examples, the outside of itself is still within the universe per se. The mechanic building the car is still a subset of the universe. The cat is contingent on physical parents. By that logic, anything must have a physical cause dependency that is a subset of the universe. Concluding that the universe had a non-physical cause would be a non sequitur given the premise you presented.
To argue otherwise is to imply that these things gave rise to themselves. This is like saying that something both exists and does not exist at the same time, which is obviously an absurd proposition.
But there's no problem applying that to God.
A good example to help demonstrate this principle is a triangle. The triangle's property of the number of angles cannot vary. It can never be anything other than 3, because triangle means having 3 angles. So by its very definition, a triangle is a thing that has 3 angles. This property of having 3 angles is explained by the very existence of there being a triangle.
It is not explained by the existence of triangles, it is merely explained by the fact that triangles have, by definition, 3 angles. It is an analytic statement. That would be true even if we have never observed anything remotely resembling a triangle before.
By contrast, the triangle's property of colour can vary. Similarly, the lengths of its sides can also vary as they can be longer or shorter. The size and colour of the triangle are properties that are not explained by the mere existence of the triangle. Hence, triangles in the physical world are dependent things, because we must look to an explanation that is external to the triangle in order to explain its existence. If we apply these same principles to the universe, then we come to the conclusion that it is dependent, because it too has properties that could be different to how they currently are.
How do you know that? Was there a time when they were different? If they have always been what they are, then what is there to explain exactly?
For example, the number of stars and planets it contains. This raises the question, how did the universe come to be? What explains it? The explanation for the universe cannot be anything that is dependent. Otherwise, we end up in a situation where the explanation requires an explanation, which does not explain anything.
Why not? Why can't the universe be dependent on something dependent? Maybe the universe is a byproduct of another contingent entity. How do you know that your God isn't as well dependent? I don't see why that possibility must be ruled out if you assume that the universe must be contingent on a God. And why can't our cosmos be the default state?
Besides, trying to use something that requires an explanation to explain something that requires an explanation will never give us any answers, as it leads to an infinite regress of explanations, which is absurd.
Not necessarily. I don't see any logical issue with an infinite regress. If one entity in that infinite chain can be the universe as we experience it, then what's the problem?
Think of a line of dominoes that goes on forever. You will never arrive at a point where they stop falling. We conclude that whatever explains the universe must itself be independent. Now, not only does it have to be independent, it also has to be eternal. In fact, independent things are by their definition eternal.
What does it mean to exist forever without time? What even is existence without time? I don't see the difference between something that does not exist and something that never exists. If God created time, what if that means? Then how could he exist in a state where time did not exist? It's like trying to plot an infinite line outside the Cartesian plane without using any axis at all.
If they're not eternal, then it means they have a beginning, and things with a beginning need an explanation. That is to say, they are dependent upon something external to explain why they came into being.
I would agree if the beginning occurred at a later point in time, as there would have been a change that would perhaps require an explanation. But if the universe has always existed since time was, then what is there to explain? If there is no change of state, then there's no need for an explanation. Why ought we explain something that never happened?
So how does the Qur'an relate to all of this? The 112th chapter of the Qur'an defines this independent, eternal existence as Allah.
قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ.
Say, He is Allah, the One.
اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ.
Allah is He on whom all depend.
لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ.
He begets not, nor was He begotten.
وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ.
And there is none comparable to Him. Allahu Samad, which means that Allah is He on whom all depend, highlights Allah's independence. and lem yelid wa lem yulad, which means he begets not, nor was he begotten, implies eternality. We can see that in less than 10 words, the Qur'an describes our Creator in a way that provides an irrefutable argument for his existence.
No, it just provides an analogic definition. You need an external demonstration to refute this hypothesis, not an existence. The fact that unicorns have a definition does not imply that they exist.
Allah is the independent, eternal reality that explains the origin of life, the universe, and everything.
Well, if by everything you include God, then you just refuted your own premise, claiming that something cannot explain itself. Asserting the opposite would just be a fallacious case of special pleading. If a God can be the explanation of itself, then why can't space-time?
Atheists might respond by claiming that the universe is eternal and therefore it does not require an explanation. This does not help them, because an eternal universe still has certain properties that could be different to how they are. Therefore, there must be something external to the universe that explains its physical properties. Hence, even an eternal universe is dependent.
If the so-called possible variations of the properties the universe holds implies the mind that said them, then who set the characteristics of God? Why isn't your God bad instead of good? I can imagine a different definition of God with different attributes, so who chose those attributes?
To help illustrate this, let's take the example of an eternal red triangle. The fact that the triangle has existed forever does not stop it from requiring an explanation for why it's red and not another colour.
By that logic, the fact that your God has always existed, whatever that even means, does not explain why he is supposedly good and not bad.
It does not matter whether the thing we are discussing is a triangle or universe. Nothing magically becomes independent just because it is eternal.
But you just said that God does not require dependency as he is eternal.
Another response that atheists might put forward is that science will eventually come up with an explanation that does not require God.
Funny animation, by the way.
This is actually not the case, as the argument from dependency is a metaphysical argument. Metaphysical arguments are based on first principles which transcends all science. If you deny first principles, then it has logical implications that lead to a worldview based on absurdity.
Asserting that the universe was created is a metaphysical violation, as you claim that a change occurred while there was no basis for that change to occur, namely time. The idea of a universe creating God is not only absurd, but metaphysically contradictory.
You can bring any scientific theory now or in the future, and this metaphysical argument will still be valid. Science can only refer to things that are dependent, because it relies on observations.
And logicality. I have never investigated the whole universe, but I can be sure as hell that I will not find a single married bachelor anywhere. We can rule out statements that have logical violations.
If you can observe something, then you are dealing with a dependent thing, because it need not have existed, or could have existed in a different way, i.e., with potentially different properties.
Like what? As far as we know, everything we observe has always existed. My computer has always existed, in the sense that all matter is composed of has always been there. That matter is merely assembled in a different fashion today.
One final challenge posed by atheists is to ask, why can't the eternal independent cause behind the universe be some blind unconscious process? Why should anyone believe that it has a will at all? In response, simply put, since the universe could have been otherwise, then it stands to reason that a decision maker is required to determine its existence from non-existence and decide which properties it has out of other possible properties. The ability to choose is the characteristic of a being that has a will and is fully conscious.
There is no reason to assume that something that has always been where it is could have been different. The universe we observe today could be very well the product of blind processes that were filled out by non-random selective natural phenomena. Such a hypothesis can be verified, and it was. There is nothing that requires intelligence about that, even less supernatural.
This independent, eternal being that chose to create is whom we Muslims call Allah.
How can you choose to create when you are spaceless, or more precisely before time was created? How do you make that transition from a state in which the decision was not made yet to a state in which the decision was made without time?